first read a message from the California League of Women Voters. Early in the process, before the ballot language was written, the League, along with several other good government groups, issued independent statements opposing mid-cycle redistricting. This was consistent with the League's long-standing positions at both the state and national level. Since then, and on the heels of Texas's decision, California's Governor Newsom and the legislature moved forward to do mid-cycle redistricting. Now the ballot measure language has been finalized, and you probably are already getting your information in the mail. While the process for the redistricting in California differs from what is happening in Texas, California League recognizes the importance of staying aligned with our national league and with state and local leagues, such as in Texas, that are or may soon be in court challenging unfair maps. With all of these factors in mind, we've decided not to take a position on Proposition 50. So again, this tonight is not a debate. We're not here to tell you how to vote, but it's a presentation about redistricting. We're really pleased to have Pedro Toledo with us. Pedro sits on the commission currently and has just been elected the chair of the Redistricting Commission for California. Pedro is also the chief executive officer of Petaluma Health Center. Since joining in 2014, he spearheaded efforts to improve the health of rural communities by expanding PHC to include 8 additional healthcare delivery sites. Under his leadership, PHC has become one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the North Bay, serving over 42,000 people through more than 220,000 healthcare visits across 9 health clinics in Sonoma County and West Marin. Recognized as a rural health leader, Pedro is actively engaged in advocating for legislation and policies that widen the circle of opportunity for people in rural and agricultural communities. He serves on the boards of directors for the National Association of Community Health Centers, the California Primary Care Association, and Partnership Health Plan of California. He's one of the 14 Californians selected to serve the 2020 California Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is charged with the critically important task of redrawing the political lines for the U.S. House of Representatives, State Senate, State Assembly, and Board of Equalization, and that's what he's going to tell us all about. So thank you again, Pedro, for being here. Take it away.
Thank you, Donna, for that introduction. So thank you for the invitation to come and address the League of Women Voters of Sonoma County. It's a pleasure to be back. I know that during the redistricting process, I had the pleasure of meeting with the League and many other organizations all across the North Bay and across the state of California to get input on the maps that we were drawing at the time. But before I begin with the presentation, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself and why I chose to serve on the commission. So my father came to Sonoma County back in the 1950s. He was a farm worker here. He came through the Bracero program. At the time, healthcare options were very limited for people who were low income. I mean, really, even hospitals weren't required to see low income individuals at that time. And it wasn't really until the 80s that it became a requirement for hospitals to do that. And certainly a lot has changed and since then, but there's also changes that are proposed that will have access to those changes, impacts on access to healthcare. So one of the reasons I chose to serve on the Redistricting Commission is because I understand that civic engagement, right? There's all these civic deserts across the state of California. What I mean by that is there are communities that are really not activated, that are really not voting. And oftentimes that's because of they've been historically excluded through the political process and in other ways through many aspects. And certainly the redistricting process is one of them, right? Redistricting has, there is a way to redistrict that allows more communities to be, give them an opportunity to elect people of their choice, and there's ways of silencing communities as well. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose to apply to I was one of those 20,000 people who applied to serve on the commission, and never did I actually think I was going to get on, but made it through the process and through the legislative strikes and had the pleasure of serving. Very proud of the work that we did. We have maps both at the state assembly, state Senate level and at the federal level that provided more opportunities for communities of color, for LGBT, for other communities to be represented. And certainly California has the most diverse, after those maps were enacted, the most diverse legislature in the country. And even at the federal level, more opportunities for communities of color, especially Latino communities that are covered under the Voting Rights Act, to elect candidates of their choice. And so very proud of the work we did. So much so that the maps certainly are very fair. So much of that there has been no legal challenge to the maps, and that's really difficult to achieve. There are I can't think of of any that haven't been challenged outside of California, right? There's a lot of challenges to these maps because of the political aspects of it. Our maps have not been challenged, and certainly the commission continues to defend. If there were to be any challenges to our maps, it's the commission's responsibility to defend those maps in collaboration with the state attorney general. So with that, let's go to the PowerPoint. And today I was going to talk a little bit about the commission, what we did, how we got to the maps that we did, and then also address some of the questions around Proposition 50 that folks might have. So I think that's
okay. I think I have this wrong, so let me stop this sharing and restart it. Okay.
absolutely no worries.
Well, while Karen is doing that, really 20,000 people applied to be on the redistricting commission.
20,000 people, and I always joke that it's like 20,000 people applied, and then of course we went through this interview process and legislative strikes, and then a lottery process for the final 50, and then like the first 12 decided who the first 9 decided who the last couple of folks would be. So so it's probably easier to win the lottery than get onto the commission.
Oh, you get to work hard. Here you go. There's your prize. All right.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Karen's got it set up for you.
Excellent. So maybe we can go on to the next slide. So, and I think we all know what redistricting is, right? It's really the redrawing of the electoral lines generally after the census. Next slide. And there's lots of reasons why we do this, and generally it's because communities change. People are born, they die, they move, and communities and the electoral lines are supposed to be roughly about the same size, and because of demographic shifts, there's a need to redistrict to depending on whether communities are gaining population or losing population, so that that districts are roughly the same size and meet those requirements. Next slide.
Okay. Let me figure out. I am sorry about there.
No, that's okay. And I would just say, the redistricting process has been used here in California and across the country many times, various times, to exclude communities from political power. I mean, the courts have held that many times over and over again across the country, and it is a process that can be used to exclude communities both. And that's something that we were working on the Redistricting Commission, the Citizens Redistricting Commission, to avoid, right? We wanted as many community voices to participate in the process. We received over 20,000 people participated in forums across the country, not to mention the outreach work and many of the other aspects, but of the map drawing process. But just tens and tens of thousands of Californians participated, provided feedback as to what they wanted to see in the maps, and we worked with that feedback to draw maps that aim to create an inclusive process for developing maps that would better to give voice to folks and allow them to elect candidates of their choice. Next slide. So, and we all know that redistricting is really important, right? It has the ability to give power to communities, to get members of Congress that or other representatives that will champion issues, funding priorities, and ensure that communities are within electoral boundaries, and of course, issues differ depending on where you are in California. The issues in San Francisco and in Sonoma County are very different than the issues in the Central Valley or in some portions of Southern California. So communities should be able to elect candidates of their choice, regardless of where they are in the community, in the state, and those issues and concerns and what folks are interested in may differ depending on where you are in the state of California. And that's something we wanted to respect as a redistricting commission. Next slide. So this is just how redistricting generally happens. You have the census that happens every 10 years. They count, the census is the official count of the United States population. With that, there's reapportionment. So that means that's the process by which House seats are allocated amongst the states. And in our case, we lost one seat in California last time around. So that also meant that districts were going to have more people in them, and necessitated additional review. And then, of course, the redistricting process is the process by which we draw the lines in California. Of course, that's done through the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. We draw the lines with a very clear process set forth in the U.S. in the California Constitution. And then from then, you hope to get as fair representation as possible through those lines. Of course, the courts are there to ensure that is the case. The courts and the citizens are there to ensure that that's the case. Next slide. So gerrymandering, right? Gerrymandering is the process by which districts are drawn in a way to give one group or one party unfair advantage. And gerrymandering, of course, was very common prior to the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. It was the lines were drawn by the party in power, and not necessarily through a transparent process. The thing about the California Redistricting Commission is that every aspect of our work was transparent. All the messiness of drawing, all of the comments and input, all was, and actually, if you want to see any of it, it's all online through videos from that whole process. So very transparent process. It's required to follow Bagley-Keene requirements, transparency law requirements. And that's not necessarily the case when outside of the commission. Next slide. So this is the criteria that we we use to draw the maps. These criteria are set forth in the California Constitution, and we had to go through this in this particular order. So first, equal proportion, equal population of the districts. You try to get those districts to conform to the requirements set forth in the Constitution of equal population, and that for U.S. House of Representatives, that's set forth in the U.S. Constitution. It tells us, and case law after that tells us how many people should be in each district and how to conform to that requirement. So that's your number one criteria, right? That's more important than anything else, making sure that every district has an equal number of people or as close to it as possible. Number two is the Voting Rights Act. That's the second most important thing, making sure that communities that where there is strong evidence of historical exclusion set forth by case law and also in the in law to ensure that that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect candidates of their choice, and those are protected minorities. They have to meet certain criteria for that. And in California, it's really only certain areas of California that met that requirement, and for the most part, Spanish-speaking populations. Number three is contiguous districts. So we worked very hard to ensure that all of the districts were contiguous. Of course, if you have to meet the first two, and then the first two, you absolutely have to meet the third and fourth, fifth, and sixth. You try to meet these as well as you possibly can. So contiguity, keeping communities of interest together, geographical compactness, and then of course nesting districts and trying to nest a state assembly district within state senate, and when possible also aligning with U.S. House of Representatives. So that's the criteria that is used. That's what's in the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and of course we worked very hard to meet those and succeeded in doing that. Although it was not easy when you're working with individuals from different backgrounds and different parties and or no party at all in my case. But working through that process to make sure that we met all of these requirements, and certainly everyone was committed to that. Next slide. So we can skip this slide. I mean, there's all kinds of redistricting efforts across the state of California. We were just focused on the state assembly, the state senate, Board of Equalization, U.S. House and of Representatives. In terms of history, prior to 2010, it was the California legislators who drew the lines, and if they failed to meet to carry out their duties in a compliant manner, then the courts would step in and adjust those lines. In 2008, the voters passed the Voters First Act for the state senate, the state assembly, and the Board of Equalization. And in 2010, they added congressional districts to our charge. The 2010 commission drew the first set of lines. And then the 2020 commission drew these latest lines for the state of California. And there's a couple of other states that have independent commissions: Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Michigan, Montana, Washington. Those are some of the states that utilize independent commissions. And I wish more states would utilize independent commissions. And certainly there's been legislation at the federal level to require independent commissions, but that has not made it out of Congress and to the president. Next slide. So we talked about just how difficult it is to get on the commission. 20,000 people applied. Then there was a selection, a supplemental application that we did. I mean, those applications were reviewed. 2,000 of us were asked to submit additional information. 120 of us were interviewed. 60 of us went to the legislature for legislative strikes, and each of the two parties had 12 strikes. And then, of course, 8 were selected, and those 8 selected the final 6 who were not struck by the legislature. So it's a very long process to get onto the commission. Next slide. So here are the commissioners. We had a very diverse set of commissioners. 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 4 unaffiliated members, so 4 of us who were declined to state. Diverse in geography, in opinions and expertise. We have nonprofit leaders, we have engineers, we had pastors, law enforcement officers, professors, public servants. So very wide-ranging group, but all of us were citizens on that commission, and we put that before everything else. Next slide. So in terms of our duties, it was to conduct community outreach, to get public input, to certainly draw the lines for the 52 congressional seats, for the 40 Senate seats, for the 80 assembly seats, and for the 4 Board of Equalization seats. And we did have more time than the previous commission just because of COVID, and everything we did was for the most part online. Although for the final map drawing, we did do that in Sacramento in person, as we were able with all of the masking requirements and such. Next slide. And social distancing. So we broke up the state into various outreach zones and ensure that we covered the whole state of California and got input from the whole state. Next slide. And this was really important. We as part of that outreach aspect, we asked communities to describe their communities of interest, right? Whether that was, minority communities or communities that were interested in preserving the coast, which was something that was very common in the North Coast and in Southern California. In folks that were interested in environmental issues, in all kinds of issues across the state of California. So we asked for residents to provide us with information around their communities and what they'd like to see in the maps, to ensure that candidates who were elected in their areas potentially would be more likely to represent them on the issues that they cared about, right? Next slide. Of course, we also spent a lot of time with language access to ensure that forums were in various languages across the state of California. We translated all of our materials into certainly Spanish and Chinese and a couple of other languages, and had forums with translation available. Actually, all of our forums were available with some level of translation, as long as we had a significant 5 days notice. Next slide. So this was our timeline in terms of drawing the maps and getting them to the Secretary of State. So we had until February to submit our final maps, February 2022. And so it was we actually had a lot more time than the previous commission because of COVID, and that was granted to us by the Supreme Court. But generally, this is done in a shorter, more abbreviated time process. I mean, I can't imagine doing an abbreviated time process, because the commission actually has to stand up the whole department to do this, hiring an executive director and staff, and you're essentially starting a whole government agency from scratch and implementing it, because there's nothing is held over from the previous commission. So you're actually charged with doing all that, getting and and being able to have the infrastructure in place to be able to achieve map drawing. Next slide. With that, so that's really the process by which we undertook to come up with the maps. And I do stand by my assessment that the maps were fair. We received more input than any other commission before. There's only one before that, but we received significant input. We had great feedback from the state of California. The maps have, there were opportunities for both parties to do better than they did in certain areas, and not that we looked at party, because that's not one of the criteria we looked at, or even the data, but they were fair, and fair maps that either party could have done better.
Thank you, Pedro.
I think maybe we can open it up for questions. I know there's some questions specifically to Proposition 50, and I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, so go ahead and put your questions in the chat feature. So most of you probably know how to do that, but click on chat, then type in your question, and we'll go ahead and ask that. There was a couple there already. In terms of the criteria, where you said there was 6 different criteria, did you use compute? How did you gather that criteria? How did you get the data to make those decisions?
Yeah, we had a whole data gathering system. So we had we would get the input from the community that would go into our data systems, and it's all cataloged, and we monitored it. And quite a bit of that is still on the commission website, and certainly in our archives as well, because we wanted to make sure that was accessible to future generations, both academic and others who are studying this type of process. But there was a committee and staff that were just dedicated to data categorization, to data gathering, to especially around the maps and map files, and because the residents from all over the state sent in their and also organizations and others sent in suggestions for how the maps should be drawn, and sent us suggestions on how to draw them, and input on which areas should qualify for VRA, and which all kinds of data that we received from across the state of California. It was all cataloged, and we all spent countless hours reviewing them. I know for the final 3 months of the map drawing process, none of us really slept, because we were actually living. We would wake up, we'd get there about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'd probably leave 11, 12 at night, right, in Sacramento, and because that was part of the process, and all of the review for the most part was done in open forum.
And so I think you answered this, but so are you a commissioner for 10 years till the next census is done, or how long does the commission last? And then you're totally done. We have a whole new group that starts.
So my term ends in 2030. So all of us have a 10-year term. And that's because we are charged with, under the state constitution, with defending our maps should there be litigation. And I think we've been getting a lot of questions about should the commission sue around this proposed around the Proposition 50. What the legal advice that we've received is that one, I think both parties have recognized that and publicly stated that the maps that were created were very fair. And what's being proposed in Prop 50 is asking the residents, the citizens of California, to change the Constitution, right? The residents of California created the commission. Certainly the residents of California can choose to move into to modify that process even temporarily, and that's what's being asked here, to temporarily allow the legislature to redraw the maps and to replace the legislative map, the maps drawn by the legislature with uh, replace their maps for the remaining term, and allowing the next independent commission to draw the maps after that.
So you would stay on as a commissioner. There wouldn't be a new commission formed if Prop 50 passes.
So I'd say on through 2030 to defend the state assembly, state senate, and board of equalization maps should they be challenged. The state attorney general would be, if Prop 50 passes, then the state attorney general, not the commission, would be charged with defending the legislative maps in court. So because obviously we didn't draw these maps that the legislature drew. And
so that's a big change. Yeah.
that's a big change, right? The legislature would be responsible for, or not the legislature, the state attorney general would be charged with defending the maps.
Can you speak, how will all of this affect Sonoma County?
Well, I think the maps that are being presented have, and I don't know if you have, if you're able to project the maps that are being proposed for Sonoma County, but there's significant changes, right, for the two congressional districts for Sonoma County. Are you able to project those?
Do you have those, Karen?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So significant changes. One map would represent Sonoma County all the way to Redding area, Shasta County, right? And the other, so the maps would significantly change for Sonoma County and connect us with communities that are different than us in terms of communities of interest. And I mean, there's some similarities in that some of those areas are rural and have that rural aspect, but certainly not necessarily coastal. We were looking at coastal environmental issues and that are very specific to Sonoma and up the Northern California coast, some of the tribal issues as well, because we have a lot of Indian tribes across Sonoma and the North Coast. And also looking at some of the wine area region with Lake County, Napa, Sonoma. So we're really looking to agricultural interests as well as some of the academic interests. So because we were looking more at communities of interest and less at trying to I mean, the stated purpose from the legislature is to create more Democratic seats, right? We weren't really looking at that. We were prohibited from looking at how to do that. So because we weren't looking at gerrymandering the state of California, in fact, we were trying to do the opposite. The communities of interest criteria are secondary at that point, right? Because it's really hard to achieve the stated goal without breaking up some communities of interest and without making some and conforming to these other criteria, right? Equal population and Voting Rights Act. And so certainly there likely will be challenges to these maps. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be. I haven't certainly analyzed the data for any of the maps, but certainly the most common type of challenge in not just for all maps are VRA challenges. So those are
Yeah,
most common, and likely probably will be a challenge for these maps. Oh, here you go.
There's the map.
So yeah, you can see how there's the coastal region that's preserved, but then you're also adding some of the more uh, eastern rural, northern rural counties here. Um, thank you. So you can kind of see there's a preservation of Marin all the way to Humboldt, and that with rural Marin, rural West Marin all the way to Humboldt, and then all the way to Shasta, and then and all of the northern aspect there in District 2, and then of course for District 1, you have some Sonoma County all the way to, it looks like Placer, and some of the counties that are in the northern part of the state. So it's very different than what it is now.
and there has been more of a Republican presence there, as I recall, right? They usually have Republican representation. So that and the Central Valley is probably the other large area that's going to be affected.
Well, I think all of the maps are largely affected across the whole state, right? But there's needing to be a lot of changes in order to achieve this goal. And yeah, the Central Valley certainly has been modified significantly, and that's likely where, if there are any Voting Rights Act type issues, it's probably in the Central Valley, Southern California area. Could be elsewhere as well.
And you and I were at a meeting with Mike Thompson and Jared Huffman, and the two of them are in support of Prop 50, and their roles are changing a little bit there. Can you talk a little bit about that? How they're going to have to share that district differently, or they're? Do you remember what they said about that?
So they've always kind of both shared Sonoma and Marin counties to some extent, right? In the case of Thompson, and it's changed because in the 2010 maps, Thompson had a lot of the coast all the way up to Humboldt and Napa, and some of Sonoma. It shifted to be more of Napa, Solano, Yolo in the 2020 maps, and Huffman got more of the inherited in 2010. Huffman inherited more of the coast, and that was preserved in the 2020 commission. So Huffman's district hasn't really changed much from 2010 to 2020, but certainly Mike Thompson did. Both had to during the transition period, both ended up having to represent areas, work together on representing the areas through the transition period, just because of relationships and such. And I think that would continue here for Sonoma County. They both have some Sonoma County representation that they would be responsible for.
And it doesn't
have
affect
to work together in Congress to advocate for our issues, which they do right now. I mean, they have a very cordial relationship, as far as I can tell, and they work together to advance the interests of Sonoma County.
And it doesn't affect any Board of Supervisors at all, right? That all those lines stay the same.
It doesn't. No, this doesn't affect any Board of Supervisors, State Assembly, State Senate. There's the speculation, and I don't know if this is true or not, right? Because the state legislature drew these lines that potentially some state legislators might have across the state also drawn lines that were favorable to people currently in the state legislature, and that was not uncommon in the 2010 commission. I'm sorry, prior to 2010, that legislators would create districts that were favorable to folks in the state legislature. There's nothing illegal around that, but it certainly something that had happened prior to 2010.
Has any other state done this in the past? I mean, you said there's been lots of gerrymandering, but since an independent district has been formed, has any state gone back on that? Do you know?
I don't believe any state has gone back. Certainly, I think there were some maps that were challenged, and courts have stepped in other states. I mean, California, the first commission was challenged a couple of times as well, but but uh, but I think all were defended successfully. So there weren't the courts didn't go back to redrawing. I don't believe any have gone back to the state legislature for certainly not for mid-cycle redrawing. And this is why we need a proposition to change the state constitution and allow the legislator to move something like this forward. And of course, at that point, before and after, there's likely going to be legal challenges to it because I mean, there's a lot of power at stake in this process, right? Political power.
And if that happens, what will that mean for the 2026 election if all this goes to the courts?
That's a great question.
That's a Karen Weeks question.
I actually,
questions.
I think I don't know the answer to that. I think what I do know is that the governor and everyone that's been working on these maps certainly had a lot of legal advice, have crafted it in this way, in a way that that to try to withstand legal scrutiny, right? And so they've had good representation, is my understanding, to develop something that hopefully has a good chance of withstanding legal challenge, and that would be our hope. Although the commission has not been involved in that process at all.
I know these maps are put together pretty quickly, but someone has asked, how could they possibly put Modoc in with the coastal areas? Like, they're so different, but I'm sure there's lots of questions like that.
I mean, sometimes because of the criteria, the legislature had to use some of, especially the first two criteria. They used all of these criteria, right, to come up with their lines. And the first criteria and the second criteria sometimes results in some funny looking maps that are not ideal. And especially if your stated goal is to end up with lines that are advantageous to one party over another, which, right, that's the stated purpose, then you would need to lump areas that are more conservative with areas that are more progressive in order to achieve, in order to make it so that there's a likelier chance of one political party having advantage over another. Because at that point you're prioritizing that over other things.
Right. You said at the beginning that the first two criteria, population, equal numbers of people, and then the second one, of course, they cannot go against the Voting Rights Act. But then, so everything else falls away from that as long as they've pretty much covered those two. They don't have to take too many other things into consideration.
Well, they still have to be compliant with all of those, but the first two you absolutely have to. The next, if you can, right? Because sometimes when you're trying to be compliant with the equal proportion, you can't exactly have contiguity because of the way that because of the number of people that might be in an area, right? And so, or nesting, or one of the lower criteria. So you try to do those if it's practicable and if you're able to do those, but you absolutely have to meet the first two.
And this is a little off subject, but the current administration is talking about changing the census so that not everyone who lives here is counted, but everyone who is a citizen is counted, I believe is what they're saying. How do you think that will affect going forward?
It would disadvantage a lot of the certainly states with large numbers of immigrant communities. And so that tends to be right. California, the western states, the state border states would be impacted as well. Of course, New York, Chicago, Illinois. So states with high numbers, higher proportion of immigrant communities would likely there'd probably be a shift of through the reapportionment process of seats from states with high proportion of if this were to pass, right? I mean, certainly that would require significant changes to the law, and then of course legal process. Just the Supreme Court
But
would have to weigh in.
would dramatically change the line. It would dramatically change the lines again, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would change
Change.
reapportionment, right? So that not so much that would change reapportionment. So, and of course I don't have the data on how many. I mean, we did have it for 2020. How many folks were immigrants, and but in terms of the counting, right? A lot of undocumented people don't get counted. A lot of communities are afraid of getting counted, so there was already an undercount that was widely acknowledged in communities with high number of immigrants. So it's unclear how that would impact, but it certainly would probably result in fewer seats for California and then a redrawing of the maps. And when we're drawing the maps with maps, the districts would become larger. So the number of people in each district would be larger. So you would probably have, instead of Thompson and Huffman, right? Potentially that represent all that space and a lot of people, you would have maybe one seat there if
Wow.
you lose more seats. Or there'd have to be lumping of more of the Bay Area, things like that. But you just have larger districts at that point, which is a challenge.
Yeah,
A state like California.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the North Bay, right? We have more people in the North Bay than does like the state of Connecticut, Rhode Island, right? Like some of these smaller states, and so and each one of our areas could potentially be. I mean, just has very different issues. The issues, as somebody pointed in MODOC, are likely very, very different than the issues in Sonoma or Humboldt or Lake or any of these other counties.
So the final question is, this current proposition says that in 2030, everything will go back to the regular redistricting. You feel confident that that will happen?
If this were to pass, if this were to pass, I feel confident that it would. If, of course, there's nothing stopping the legislature from passing another proposition, right? But it would require another proposition. It would have to go back to the voters, and the voters would need to at that point essentially allow the legislature to draw the maps in 2030 or whatever it is that whatever the changes might be proposed. So I'm confident that the voters would get to decide if Proposition 50 were to pass. The voters would get to decide. There are some that speculate that there will always be a crisis that could be used to prevent to allow for gerrymandering from whichever party is in power at the time, right? And so so that's always a fear of that.
But at least in Prop 50, they did put this end time that it would go back to the Independent Commission starting 2030.
Yeah, and absolutely. So in this proposition, it would go back to the commission if something were to change, if without going back to the voters, it would absolutely have to go back to the Independent Commission.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So you must have answered everybody's questions with your presentation, which was really informative and very helpful to us. Hopefully it'll help people make decisions about voting.
So I will add that at the last commission meeting 2 weeks ago, we did do sort of like a straw poll. We didn't take an official position on the Proposition 50, but we did go around and kind of all check in, and And while there are one or two members that are supporting Proposition 50, the vast majority of the members are not, or are staying neutral, not taking a position. And that's where I am at this point, not taking a position. And that's where the commission is as well, that we're not taking a position at this time, that there's nothing keeping us from taking a position in the future. And certainly I think if we took a position today, based on the straw polls that we took in the last public forum, I think it would probably be a no. But we have not taken an official position at this time.
Okay.
But I think the sentiment is leaning towards opposing, not supporting.
Okay.
Which is
Someone did-
understandable, right? When you have 14 people charged with not gerrymandering the maps.
Well, and of course, the league thinks, you know, every state should have the
Absolutely.
independent district. So that's where the league is standing. Someone did just ask, can you review the types of districts the commission draws and the number of voters currently in each type? That's a lot. Was that on your slide? I think this is recorded, so anyone will be able to see the recording again and see the slideshow again on our YouTube page.
And we can certainly send out the slides to your members, right? There's nothing,
Yeah,
you can certainly send out the slides to the members.
okay, great.
I'm happy to answer any questions if members have questions offline. They can always email me.
Excellent. Thank you, Pedro. And Jim Masters has put some more information in the chat too. So if you'd like to see more information, please look at that. We don't have a meeting planned for November yet. We're looking at a issue hopefully about healthcare. So stay tuned on our website so that you'll see when the November monthly meeting will be. We do, of course, encourage everyone to get out and vote and encourage all your neighbors and friends to vote as well. It's an important issue, and we hope you'll take this information you've learned and vote your conscience.
There's also one more coming up, the pro and con at the Sonoma County Library. It's a virtual meeting at 6 p.m. on October 15th.
Great. Thank you, Leona. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Pedro, again. We appreciate your time.
Great seeing you again, Donna, and everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.